This season's college football national championship epitomizes a tale as old as time. The overmatched underdog opposite the ferocious giant. David versus Goliath. No one expected TCU to be here. With preseason title odds north of 200 to 1, the Horned Frogs would be the unlikeliest of champions in modern college football. But even though they made it here, not many outside their own locker room think they can actually get it done.
Let's go get one more.
TCU opened as a 13-point underdog against Georgia, the largest point spread in any BCS or college football national title since 2002, when Miami was favored by 12 against Ohio State. And the Buckeyes won, perhaps a good omen for the Horned Frogs. But in terms of talent, the matchup is lopsided. Georgia boasts the second most talented roster in the country, while TCU doesn't even crack the top 30, ranking 32nd overall. But the games aren't played on paper, and if anyone knows that by now, it's the folks from Fort Worth.
We're going to do exactly what we've done every game up to this point. We're going to prepare the best we can. We're going to play really hard. Our guys are going to play tough.
On the other side, the Georgia Bulldogs, the defending national champions. The Dogs seeking a dynasty, looking to become the first program to win back-to-back titles since Alabama did it a decade ago. The defensive coordinator for those Crimson Tide teams, Kirby Smart, who's brought that same winning culture with him to Athens.
Take the snap, take a knee, win the game!
Since Smart took over in 2016, the Bulldogs have had 4 12-plus win seasons. They've had 50 players drafted, and this will be Smart's 3rd national championship game.
If we want any chance of winning a national championship, we have to play a lot better football, but we got to keep the resiliency and composure along with us.
It's been the best college football playoff to date, and we've got one more game to go. Who will stand victorious when the fight is over? David or Goliath?
Chris Hassel providing the dramatic backdrop for the College Football Championship. And let's get some insight from college football writer Tom Fornelli. Tom, TCU, they didn't even win their conference, and now they're 60 minutes away from their first natty since 1938. So, based on what you just heard, and of course what you've seen all season long, how would you describe the identity of this team as they get set to face their toughest test yet?
You know, it's a team with a lot of confidence and a lot of reason to be confident because as Chris went over in that intro there, like this is a team, if you look at it from a talent perspective, they're not the profile from what you're expecting to see in the college football playoff or what we have seen in the college football playoff. Because you look at Cincinnati last year, yes, they were a Cinderella. They came from the group of 5. They were not the typical playoff team. They also had 9 players on that squad get drafted in the NFL last spring. I don't know if there are 9 NFL draft picks, honestly, on this TCU team right now. And you look at the talent level, it is nowhere near what Georgia is as far as recruiting rankings and all that kind of stuff. But this is a TCU team that, as the year went on, has defied expectations, and its confidence level has just continued to rise because we've seen time and time again, during the regular season, they would fall behind, they would come back, and they would win games. You do that once, you think, all right, cool, we got away with it. You do it twice, you kind of wipe your brow and say, we're getting a little lucky here. You do it 3 times, 4 times, you kind of just start believing you can do anything. Like there's nobody in the country we can't beat. And they've taken that attitude to the field every single week. They took it through the regular season, finished undefeated in the Big 12, reached the Big 12 championship. They lost that game, but they still got to go to the playoff. And last week, against the Michigan team they weren't supposed to beat, they went out and they beat them and they led the entire game. So now heading into the title game against Georgia, in which they're nearly 2 touchdown underdogs and nobody's giving them much of a shot to win, this is a position they've been in all season. They weren't supposed to be here to begin with. They weren't even a team that reached a bowl game last year, let alone a team that was expected to reach the college football playoff national title game. So they've got nothing to lose. That's how they've played all year, and I'm assuming that's how they're going to play when they take the field on Monday night.
Yeah, when they played Michigan, they had a swagger about them. And, of course, we've talked about the fact they went, 9 weeks without a bye week before making it to the college football playoff, where they at least had a bit of a break to reorganize themselves, and they looked really good against Michigan. But, Tom, what about this Georgia team? The 6th defending college football playoff champion to get back to the title game to defend their title. When you look at them year over year, where are they in comparison to last year's title winning team?
I don't think they're as good as last year's team was overall, but I don't think the difference is that big or as big. If you look at last year's defense, we talk about the 2021 Georgia defense as being one of the best defenses of all time at the college level, if not the best. And they lost a ton of players from that unit, moved down to the NFL, and defensively, the Bulldogs haven't been quite as good as they were last year. They're still one of the best defenses in the country, but they're not up to last year's level. What isn't paid as much attention to is the offense got better. Last year, this was a team where the biggest question was, can they score enough points against elite teams? You kind of ignored the fact that if you looked at a lot of the advanced metrics, they were a top 5 team offensively last year in a lot of key areas. But Stetson Bennett was somebody who was overlooked as something of a detriment to what this offense can do. He's a Heisman finalist this year, and while you can debate whether he deserved to be till the cows come home, the fact is he's improved as a player, and he does with coming into clutch situations like we talked about with TCU. We've seen Stetson Bennett have kind of rough games, but when the fourth quarter comes around and Georgia needs him to make plays, he is making plays. He did it in the title game against Alabama last season. He did it last week against Ohio State with his team down 2 scores, a situation that Georgia is not used to being in. He did not panic. He led them back. They got the win. They are here. So overall, I think offensively, this team is a little bit better. They're a little more dangerous in the passing game. They've got a little more talent at the receiver position. Defensively, they're not quite as good. But when you put it all together, I still think this is the best team in the country, and I think they should win this game. I don't know that they will win this game.
Yeah, 12.5-point favorites as of Friday afternoon. Worth noting, if they win, it'll be history. No defending CFP champion has successfully defended their title in this particular championship era. All right, let's talk about some matchups here. TCU wide receiver Quentin Johnston went off versus Michigan last week. 6 receptions, 163 yards, and a tutty. How tough of a matchup is he for Georgia's defensive back, Kelee Ringo?
I think this is going to be a very key thing to watch because you mentioned Johnston's numbers last week. Of those 160 yards receiving, I think about 115 of them came after the catch. That is where he is the most dangerous in the open field with the ball in his hands. He's capable of breaking big plays. But we saw last week, Kelee Ringo, when he was covering Marvin Harrison Jr., he was struggling. And Kelee Ringo, for as talented as he is, he's also a large defensive back. He's 6'2", about 215, 220. He's probably more of a safety than he is a corner, but he plays corner in this Georgia defense. And he has struggled at times covering receivers that are kind of tacticians, the excellent route runners, the guys who just mastered the craft, which is what Marvin Harrison Jr. is. I don't think Quentin Johnston, as talented and as good as he is quite the level of route runner that Marvin Harrison is. He's more of a guy that gets schemed open in that offense. They get the ball into his hands, and then they let him go do what he does, which is just create plays. So whether Kelee Ringo is able to stick with him and, more importantly, make the tackle in the open field when he does get the ball, because that is one thing we saw last week Michigan really struggle with against TCU. Players got in the open field. Michigan missed tackles. Big plays happened. Kelee Ringo is going to have to stick with Johnston, follow him all over the field because they move him around a lot, both pre-snap and in motion before the snap. And he's going to have to get there, make the tackle when he does get to him. And Georgia as a defense as a whole, one thing that they've done a spectacular job of all season long is they do swarm to the ball and make tackles. And I think that is going to be an interesting and a key part of this game on Monday night.
Georgia's defense allowed a season-high 41 points, over 460 yards last week versus Ohio State. They got the win, but you can bet TCU is going to be going over that tape all this week. Speaking of defense, what about this matchup between TCU's defense and this Georgia rushing attack, which averaged over 200 yards per game this season?
Yeah, this is an interesting matchup to watch, too, because last week, there's a lot of talk about TCU runs the 3-3-5 defense. And the one thing everybody knows that 3-3-5 defenses struggle against is offensive teams that are running 2 tight end sets because they can out-physical them at the line of scrimmage and kind of overpower them, whereas the 3-3-5 was designed to stop the kind of spread offenses that you see a lot in the Big 12, which is why TCU adopted it, and pretty much everybody in the Big 12 has adopted it over the last 15 to 20 years. But last week against Michigan wasn't able to overpower TCU at the line of scrimmage. Some of that was due to the fact that the Wolverines lost Luke Schoonmaker early in that game, and they were already thin at the tight end position, and they kind of had to change up their approach. But even before that happened, you saw TCU's front seven outside the very first snap of the game. they were sticking around. They were not getting pushed around. In fact, they were creating more havoc by confusing the Michigan offensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see what they're able to do against this Georgia team, and why I think it's very important to track the status of Georgia tight end Darnell Washington, who got banged up last week, and we're not sure he's going to be able to play in this game. He's a huge part of Georgia's rushing attack. People dream on him as a receiving tight end, but what he is right now is an incredible run blocker. He's basically an extra tackle when he lines up on that offensive line. So if he's able to play in this game, that's a huge boost to Georgia. But another thing to keep track of here, hasn't been discussed much, but Georgia lately hasn't done a very good job running the ball. Early in the season, in the first 2 months, in September and October, this is a team that had a 55.8% success rate running the ball. Now, success rate is basically a fancy way of saying, was the play a positive? If it was 1st and 10, did you get to 2nd and 5? If it was 2nd and 5, did you get to 3rd and 3? How often are you staying on schedule? The last 2 months of the season, Georgia's success rate running the ball has dropped to 38.5%. They have not been nearly as effective. They've had some big plays, which have helped prop up the yards per carry metric. But as far as a down-to-down basis, they've had trouble staying on schedule, and it's put more of an onus on Stetson Bennett in the passing attack. So that is going to be the most interesting thing for me in this one.
Yeah, we mentioned the average 200 yards per game, but they were held to 135 last week as a team versus Ohio State, to your point. College football writer Tom Fornelli discussing the College Football Playoff Championship coming up Monday night from SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. The Bulldogs listed as 12.5-point favorites as of today. Georgia looking to become the first repeat champion since Alabama back in 2011 and 2012. They would be the first repeat in the CFP era. TCU, of course, looking for their first natty in over 8 decades.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.